On the right side of you, there is Trev Edwards. Trev Edwards is the Vice President Global Brand and Category Management of Nike. Nike is a $19 billion powerhouse of brands, and he is said to be one of the most innovative brand builders and marketeers in this business. You have been also awarded for that, and you drive, I think, 75% of Nike's business and categories through your stewardship. Very happy having you here. Left to him is David Kenny, who is the managing partner at Viva Key, the newly created interactive arm of Publicis Group, global, one of the top 3 global advertising and marketing groups. And you said you bring together basically different arms of digital marketing and build a competence center out of that. And David is representing that in his steering strategy there. And he's also a chairman of the Global Agenda Council of Marketing of the WEF, basically. Thinks a lot beyond marketing. Then we have Samir Arora, who is a serial entrepreneur, ex-Apple, and recently, 5 years ago, launched Glam Media. Disclosure, it's a border-related company. And I think you have a thesis that brand marketing online works. I would be interested in what the others tell you. And so that is something you might discuss. You're a little bit the challenger of brand online at this point, because you know the saying of lousy pennies on the other side. I'm very happy that we have back to DLD after 4 years, my friends, and Andrew Robertson, the chairman of BBDO, a truly iconic company in advertising, and which won most, I think, awards in the industry at all. And 4 years ago, when Andrew spoke here, he really made clear what marketing is. And I'm happy that you're back. And he's seated next to Anders Jensen, who is the Vice President Brand Communication at Mercedes-Benz. And he's basically developing and stewarding the brand image of Mercedes globally. Another iconic brand of elegance and innovation, I may say so. But also, everybody has his challenges in this market, and how do you address that? And I'm also very, very happy that Nazin Mansour de Carvalho Guanes Gomez, was that right, is here, who is the chairman of ABC Group and of Africa. And Nizan comes from Brazil, and Brazil is one of these superpowers I know too little about, actually. And it's one of these global economies we know not so much, but which is a huge, very innovative market, especially for those people in marketing, also a market where marketing and brands really have a lot of creativity, but also a lot of a huge kind of scale in terms of mobile business and others. I'm happy that you're here, and this is really kind of a wonderful balance. I'd like to introduce now to you 2 minutes a clip and to initiate this panel, this 5-6 men, and going back to 1960. And could I have that now? Could I have tone, please?
It colors her kiss. In her kiss,
the sequence of Mad Men.
It colors her man.
Who knows Mad Men series? You should all know Mad Men, basically. So Madison Man is a 4 or 5 times Emmy Award-winning show, series, I think it's 3rd seasons in the States, about advertising in the 60s. And I would like to show just a minute and a half how then advertising was created with a nice moment to start with. And the setting is that Don Draper, the head of Mad Men, is pitching to a client, and that's basically how it tries to persuade him.
Belgially lipstick. Mark your man.
I only see one lipstick in your drawing.
Women want colors.
Lots and lots of colors.
Mark your man. It's pretty cute.
Oh, you like this? Well, maybe we should cut down to 5 shades or 1.
I'm not telling you to listen to anyone, but this is a very fresh approach.
It's okay, Kenny.
I don't think there's much else to do here, but call it a day. Gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Is that all?
You're a non-believer. Why should we waste time on kabuki?
I don't know what that means.
It means that you've already tried your plan, and you're number 4. You've enlisted my expertise, and you've rejected it to go on the way you've been going. I'm not interested in that. You can understand.
I don't think your 3 months or however many thousands of dollars entitles you to refocus the core of our business.
Listen, I'm not here to tell you about Jesus. You already know about Jesus. Either he lives in your heart or he doesn't. Every woman wants choices. But in the end, none wants to be one of 100 in a box. She's unique. She makes the choices, and she's chosen him. She wants to tell the world he's mine. He belongs to me, not you. She marks her man with her lips. He is her possession. You've given every girl that wears your lipstick the gift of total ownership.
Sit down.
No.
I know all of them know to do that, basically. I think it shows the relationship in between clients and advertisers. And you saw the lipstick 4C, which was then the new medium. Actually, in the 60s, television was just starting, so there was no television at this point. They just created their media departments. That's 50 years ago. 50 years ago, and you see, I think many things just are the same, but a lot has changed also. Now we have a big panel, I know that, and we aim to do that. What I'd like to do is just have 2-3 rounds of questions to all, and then specifically maybe ask some of you to some ideas. And the first thing I'd like to ask, and I ask you in the briefing to be very specific, is really tell us right now, on the spot, what is the most challenging and driving factor in your business in terms of brand building, marketing, and what does it mean to you in your business? What do you think is really the big thing I have to care for right now? And I would like to start with Trevor at this point.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, I'd say that certainly from what I just saw, things have definitely changed. That's not the world that I live in. But I think the thing that perhaps most stands out for us in terms of the way that things have changed starts with the consumer. And I think the most important shift has been that today the consumer is squarely in charge. And that's been enabled by a lot of the work that's done by people in this room, to the point where gone are the days when sort of advertisers or brands dictated to the consumer about what they should do. What we have seen is a very radical shift that really focuses on the consumer and their life and what they actually want to do. And so I think about it, and we think about it certainly at Nike a lot, about that shift from selling and communicating to really thinking more about buying and helping people to experience life, to experience their life and experience products in a much better way. So that really sort of sets the foundation for the shift. One of the second things that we think a lot about, and particularly I think evidence here, is about information, and certainly how the consumer is becoming more and more comfortable with actually allowing us the privilege of their information. And when we have that information, if you use that information properly, you can actually better service them. And I think that's probably one of the biggest shifts that we're going through. Right now, we're in an adolescent phase, I think it was said this morning, where we're using a lot of the information more so to sort of support an old model that's almost past and is passing by, which is still about advertising, as opposed to it's about actually helping serve people's lives with their products. So that's the second biggest part. And then the third one I would kind of really call out is specifically what we are seeing is a focus on that, not just connecting with one individual consumer. That's absolutely important, and it sets the foundation for the things that we're doing. But what we are sort of seeing is that one consumer has tremendous influence because they are always connected with other consumers. And so what we see, the consumer's in charge. They are radically shifting. We have more and more information about them. if we use that information better, we can actually serve them better. And at the end of the day, they are, as I would always say, they're our judge and jury, and ultimately our executioner if we don't deliver to them what they're looking for.
Trevor, thank you. But may I ask you specifically, what does this mean, or did this mean to you, for your business decisions in this year, last year, or next year?
No, I mean, I think that, this means specific in terms of how our organization has to evolve. Certainly, a lot of the tools and things that we see that are being created, a lot of the techniques that we talk about are great tools. We obviously are using information much more, and I'll show some examples. We'll talk about some examples maybe later on, like our Nike Plus as an example, where we're able to take the run-in data from a consumer and actually give it back to them in some really fresh and interesting ways. So that's a matter of taking information, or Nike ID, which is a customization model in terms of giving the consumer a more personal product. So any one of these are pretty quantum shifts in the marketplace, and they're allowing us to be more connected, but it ultimately is focused on serving that consumer better so that they can get on their journey to have a better life, better experience, be better athletes in our business. So that's kind of how it's actually affecting us.
David, no, just doing the round. How do you see that?
Yes, well, agree with all of that. I think the challenge I'm most focused on is a constant pace of innovation, because I don't think you can just communicate your way out of innovative products. And I think what we're finding now with the speed of communication is how quickly you have to innovate, and there's nothing you can take for granted. Not one of our clients, but a good story. I come from a small state in America called Massachusetts. Barack Obama won that state by the widest margin of any state. And there was sadly, a senator passed away, Ted Kennedy. And the assumption was, well, it's always been a Democrat. In fact, it's always been a Kennedy for 47 years. From the time of Mad Men, the next one will be as well. There was a good contest to nominate the nominee, but then she thought because she was the Democratic nominee, she won. She went on vacation. Another guy, very slowly through social networks, built demand under the radar, didn't really take a television ad out until 10 days before the campaign, and he won by a pretty wide margin. So no annuity counted, right? No annuity counted. We see this all the time with products. Brands think they built this brand equity over 5-6 decades. It will prevail. The line extension will work. It really isn't. The truth comes out as to whether there's a real innovative product or not. And a lot of what we're spending time on is actually making sure the product innovation is there, because otherwise the communication is irrelevant.
So you would think that the fundament of brands is not that stable anymore at this point? Is it what you tell your clients?
Yeah, I don't think so at all. I think that the idea of brand asset value is less relevant today than it's ever been. The truth of a product, the truth of whether the product is genuinely better than the other, will be known by people. They will tell each other. The best products win. And I think we all have a much higher obligation and responsibility and requirement to be involved with the product, not just the communication.
So the product qualities informing about product qualities or whatever?
Yes, and whether people really like it and what their experience is. Qualities in the eyes of the user.
Okay.
Right? So it's, yeah, I think it's essential.
Okay. Samir.
I think that's a really good question on, what's the biggest thing from a brand perspective. And I think I'd like to just go back in time when I was at Apple and in part building and really trying to understand how to build a brand that was very young. And what comes to my mind is the example that's used a lot in almost all schools and marketing circles is about the Coke and Pepsi campaign, and how, in most cases when they did testing, Pepsi with the young generation would win, and they created the entire campaign on that premise. What was fascinating for me is if you look at the study, that if they did the same tests without a brown bag, Coke always won. So to me, that's what branding is about, which is it's the real essence of the creation of desire. Now, in our current world we live in, unlike this revolution of television and cable we've seen, you've got to look at two other factors. So the product itself, the brand. Now you have to look at what are consumers doing, which is what we talked about a little bit earlier. And then the third is, what is the medium or the media business that will allow you to interact with them? The biggest changes that have happened, in my opinion, are in buckets 2 and 3, not as much in 1. And I think that's what I find troubling is when we started at Glam, one of our first premise was brands need to engage customers very early on in setting the attributes of how they want to be perceived. While the internet as a medium till then was largely being used for direct response, which comes very, very late. Or as someone said, if you're trying to buy a car and trying to find a dealer by zip code, it's very late to change you to, from a Mercedes to a Volvo. You're very deep in that decision process. So in terms of me, the biggest challenge is to really understand the changes in consumer behavior with the internet, or as I say, what is the consumer doing on the web? Not what you think they're doing, not what you'd like them to do, not what you're used to them doing, but really what are they doing? So, to me, the amount of change that has happened, especially in the last, I would say, 12 years, there are some fundamental changes in consumer behavior. I'll name 2, which affects brands a lot. One is, we are now the search researcher. We don't go into a newsstand and say, I don't want the magazines, I just want the articles on yoga retreats or sailing and cigars. We take the packaged media as a whole and consume it. On the internet, we don't do that. We go, we search, we find things with total disregard to media as brands. So the media brand has become very, very fragmented. That's the first change. On the actual consumer side also, from only being involved in the tail end of the consumption, you're now involved in social media, you're involved as an influencer, and the cycle is both ways. So I think that as a publisher, what's really concerning for us is not to attach ourselves with the older definitions of media, which was to create content in a one-way direction through distribution of either magazines or television, but still involved in the true definition of media, which is to find consumers in places where they want advertising and they're receptive to advertising, and internet is a fantastic medium. If you look at the time being spent actually on the engagement metrics, not just reach. A lot of people talk about reach, but if you look at any of the top agencies that report like Comscore on not just reach but usage, the usage is absolutely staggering. So the consumer has already left. Now the question is, as a brand, how can we help brands better recapture some of that emotion they were used to getting largely from television and a lot from glossy magazines?
So, thank you. Coming back later in the second round is, okay, if that is all true, I would like to know why there's so little marketing and advertising spent in this medium right now. Dr. Borda was referring to the lousy pennies. Television is still not there. I would like to know that later. That's very interesting. Well, we should discuss that, and I'd like to know from you then why and when at some point and why not. But we should dig into this point because it's very, very important. Andrew, now my initial question to you: what's the big challenge for you right now, or where do you see this key driving change factor at this point? What does it mean to you, being such an established group, that is in this very established business at this point?
I mean, I think that what was interesting to me, just looking back at that Mad Men clip, is that whilst an awful lot has changed, I don't sit in rooms with people smoking much these days and bits of cardboard on that usual. But what I found interesting is how little hasn't changed, or how much hasn't changed. The fundamental requirement that we have is to answer the same questions as Don Draper was asking in that clip. How do consumers behave today, and why? What are the motivations for that behavior? And he, as portrayed in that 1961 clip, recognized that the fundamental motivations were emotional, not rational. That hasn't changed. Isolating those, understanding those, is still very, very important. And then how do we create something, in his case, a couple of pieces of cardboard, that will engage the attention of that consumer and give them an experience that changes their behavior the way we want it changed. Those questions are exactly the same in 2010 as they were in 1961. People don't change that much. They really don't. Technology changes unbelievably fast, but people don't. Their fundamental motivations and needs are pretty much the same as they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And the trick is to somehow manage both things. How do you live with the pace of change in technology, the tools that we have to use, whilst keeping your head very, very squarely on the questions, the fundamental questions that we still need to provide answers to. And those, they just haven't changed. They're the same questions as they were and they always be. And I believe the challenge, the biggest single challenge, is still the same one. How do you create an experience that is sufficiently engaging for an audience to choose to participate in it and which changes their behavior? That's the business we're in. And the tools change and the timelines change, the speed changes, all of that changes, but those questions remain the same.
So basically you say, okay, you're not that concerned about what's happening in the web, and the fact what Trevor was addressing to, that advertising is not still, you don't need advertising at this point anymore because the consumer is, as also David said, informing himself, herself, going specifically to a question?
Well, I use the same definition of advertising as consumers do, as opposed to, you know, the way it tends to be commented on in general. And consumers, I'm sure, regard an awful lot of the activities that Trevor's referring to as non-advertising as advertising. For me, advertising is any communication, any experience that changes the way consumers behave. So I think the form changes, but the principles and the goals and the issues don't.
Okay. So Arne, I would like to ask you the same initial question. What changes? What is the challenge for you? Also now from a huge global brand perspective.
Well, so many clear words from so many wise men, and how to follow up on that. And just to follow up what you just said, Andrew, I think that in a world in turbulent change, it's so nice that some of the major questions remain the same. And you couldn't have said it better than I would have done it, because the major questions we're asking ourselves as marketers today hasn't changed at all. It's how to attract attention, how to safeguard that we get people out there who have desire for our products. Because at the end of the day, it's about selling products. Of course, there are some very fundamental changes. And that is that we very quickly have to ask the question, which mean is the best one to safeguard that we transport our message? Here we have a huge variety of possibilities, and I do believe for that reason that what I've been seen so far during the last years, we all together have been isolated, talking about the future of print, the future of TV, the future of internet, and so on. I think that's a stupid discussion, because it has nothing to do by discussing one mean separately. This has something to do which mean is the best to transport our message. A lot of people involved in the media business, they do not understand this question, and they will be dead in a quite short period of time. It's quite easy. Or they can commit suicide at very short notice, and then we get rid of a lot of problems which we have to face. It's very, very simple for us. We start very early in our process to ask the question, we get a message. We do not ask our agency now to develop a print campaign or a TV campaign. We ask our agency, and in that case, our creative agencies also have had to learn a lesson. Because at that table, also my media buying agency is sitting, and then we start discussing where are the information channels, the communication channels best fitted to transport that message. And that is the biggest change we have. Beside that, just relax altogether. The questions remain the same.
That's interesting. Could you give, from now steering Mercedes, an example where you said you shifted the media mix, but the message was the same with a launch you now had, or one recent kind of initiative you launched where you said, okay, we changed the media mix, so we changed something, but we kept the same message we could have 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. The message is always how to transport a brand philosophy or a product philosophy. That hasn't changed at all. However, of course, are the elements you play with, also the wordings you're using, the symbols you're using, that changes. That depends also very much upon the audience you want to approach. So for that reason, we're constantly on the move, and it would be completely wrong to say that we do not change the way we communicate. But still the questions, and that's what I meant about it, the questions we're asking are the same. Of course you have to develop and be state-of-the-art in what you're doing. We also know that we get generation growing up, and by the way, this generation has nothing to do with demographics. A lot of people start talking about age. Age is definitely not a very good demographic element to diversify. If you take Prince Charles and Ozzy Osbourne, I think that example has been used several times. They're just as old. I think we all together can agree upon that their psychographics look quite different. That means, again, when I communicate, the communication towards Prince Charles will be a bit different than when I communicate with Ozzy Osbourne. So for that reason, it's not that easy to answer your question with a very simple answer.
Okay. Nizar, now maybe I'd like to ask your perspective. Already there are 5 answers to that, but where do you see that? And maybe you take from your market, from your region, Brazil, from your group you created, a perspective on what is the challenge right now for you? Where do you see, what should people here in the audience have in mind when they think about marketing?
Well, with all due respect to my colleagues, there are people here who I highly respect. But I think that what has changed from that moment today is courage.
Courage.
Because the advertising agencies, they have a very cost-intensive structure. So it's very difficult for them to speak to somebody. Maybe he shouldn't have spoken in that tone, but with that courage, By the way, we have 2 brilliant clients here. But there's a lot of lousy clients. Who can stand General Motors? I was not created by God to serve to General Motors. The guy comes in and he says, I want you to give me all the best work, but I don't want to pay anything. Isn't that fantastic? That's a great business model. So I said, look, get out of here. No, I'm not going to work for you. And it's not because I'm braver than the others. It's because my structure is leaner. So that's why I believe very much in the small business. And that's why I believe so much change is going to come from small structures. And that's why I want to have several small digital shops around the world. People who can say no. And I know exactly what I've been part of the DDB board. I know very well our situation. I respect highly, but it's very, very hard to say no when you have such a hard structure. You have too many mouths to feed, and nothing really great is born from fear. So the great challenge now is how to be courageous when you have so much structure of costs. That's it.
Hey, Marcel, could
I think this needs commentary. And also from the audience, I see Michael Trautmann over there, who created you would say, an independent, smaller group out of a bigger one. Maybe you could comment later at stage. Okay, but Trevor, now to you.
Yeah, maybe I want to comment, not so much on the courage part, but I do think that this assumption that things haven't changed, I believe is a fallacy. And I think it's really important to say that things have changed. We started out with a model that was really about mass communications. Now the consumer can actually interact with us, and they're actually giving us information. They're telling us what they want. They're giving us clues. Our job is to listen to those clues more acutely, more deliberately than we've ever done before. And in that provides a new opportunity for us to succeed and create great products and create great services and ultimately give them great experiences. But it comes from looking at it from a different perspective. We were looking at it from manufacturers, advertisers, outward, as opposed to consumers who are living their lives, doing things every single day inward. And I feel that if we can make that shift, particularly around the digital model, it allows us some far more bigger opportunities. That's why I keep saying I believe we should embrace it as a change, even though the fundamental questions remain. But if you embrace it as a change, then you find newer opportunities. I think that's certainly the way that we keep coming back at it, which is embrace it as a change. We'll see bigger opportunities for us to serve those consumers.
And I think you're 100% right, but I think what tends to happen is that the change becomes the end in itself. And I think all I'm saying is recognize you have to live with both. You have the same sticky, tough, horribly hard questions to answer. You have a lot of very exciting new things to execute against those answers with. And what I observe is that the revolutionaries like to forget about the questions and just talk about what wonderful things are possible. And then there's another group of people who are only really interested in what hasn't changed. The trick is the and, not the or. And I believe that that is the way you can make hay while the sun is shining, because most people won't do that.
David, would you like to comment also on Nissan's?
So
because you're representing a big structure. I don't know what your cost structure is, but like to comment on that?
I would. Listen, I started my agency, and when it was small, saying no is good, saying what if is better, and we did great things. And I hear a lot of entrepreneurs who have that visceral reaction, but you all want to get bigger. You all want to be big, right? And so did we, and we did get bigger, and then we had public shareholders, and we got bigger again, and then we merged with Publicis, and now we brought in Razorfish, which has this same DNA, and several others. My dream in life is to have both big and small, because we're actually more courageous as big. Because when you're big, you can try to get something done at Yahoo or Google or Microsoft, and they can invest in you in a way that they can't invest if you're smaller because it's too complex. So I think the challenge for the agencies, but the challenge for the marketers, is to be big and small at the same time, because there's a lot of power in big. I think the real, to me, the difference between big and small is a lot to do with ego. The people at the top have to accept that they are not the smartest people in the company. If you take your ideas from within, you have a lot of stars. And I think at the very basic level, this is what consumers are telling us. The consumers want to be the star. Maybe they know more about what they love than you do. Maybe they have a fashion sense better than ours. The fact that we live in Paris doesn't give us the right to determine what is fashion. Although some do think that. It's this whole notion of empowerment in the company and all the way to the consumer is what we can do with this technology. We can be big and small, and I think the world will be better when you pull that off.
And David, you acquired Razorfish, and Razorfish was an interactive agency, which was basically, put it simply, build websites and build interactive environments. And then you brought this digital side to your business. We shift over to the digital side, but I would like to ask Arne on this big and small question that was raised by Nissan. So for you as a client, how you look at that? Do you, at that question, we had, Nissan was saying, okay, things are different. What is your stance there?
No, what I do believe in is that still that we have completely changes of the rules of the game. That is something I think that we all need to accept. You can always look upon it as a big risk, you can look upon it as a challenge, and for me it's a challenge with an ocean of opportunities. I think that's one of the most important. And I fully agree with you, if you have big structures who are used to do things in one specific way, that is absolutely something which hinders development. So you need to be open-minded, and you need to always look for possibilities, and these possibilities are there. That's one of the reasons why I also clearly said, my first opening remark, let's not have this as an isolated discussion. I think that everyone has said something which is 100% correct, and we very quickly agree upon and say, yes, that's the way to move on. What has also very clearly fundamentally changed is we do not talk local, we talk local business, we do not talk national business anymore, we talk global business, we talk communities, we have a lot of social networks out there. These social networks are, by the way, not only tied to the net, they're tied to a lot of other activities, and you can play a complete different game here. Yes, the consumer is growing up, he's asking a question. Questions which you didn't get earlier, or where you had 72 hours or I don't know what to answer them. That game has changed completely. If I do not answer at real time, I'm out of business. However, I do fundamentally disagree regarding the meaning of brands, because I do believe that brands, especially today, is getting much bigger importance than it had in the past. For us as brand managers, however, the game is changed due to the fact that we need to follow up on these rules, and we need to know how exactly to play with our games, play with our brands, and safeguard that we there also give a value added to our customers. That hasn't changed. That's the same question which has been asked for thousands of years. So it is an exciting game, and it's a big, big opportunity in what's happening now.
Okay. Now we have here the digital people, basically, DLDs, Digital Life Design. So in the second part, let us focus a little bit on the digital markets. And I was mentioning David already. I'd like to ask Samir first. So if that is all true and usage of internet is that big, and demographics, non-demographics, so medium, why? And obviously, look at the online advertising market in the United States, for example. It's 50% search, and that is basically Google. And the question is, okay, if marketeers are, and there's local business in that too, right? But if marketeers are spending that much on one channel with one company or a few of these companies, certainly there's innovation at this point. So, and the question is, do you need all this brand marketing in the future? And do you need it in the internet, in this situation of the internet? And I'd like to understand from you now, how do you see that? And first ask Samir, because he built his premise of Glam that brands will come to the net. It's a fast-growing company. You have 130 million users already, and top 8, I think, in the States. But still, why do you think brands will come, and when do they come, and why they haven't come so far?
I think that's a really, really good question. Yeah. And I think the only way to answer that question is to go back in history and look at what and how media changed and evolved. So if you look at the birth of television, there was no prime time when television started. Think about this, right? This idea of prime time is relatively new. Right? That when you see the progress of things like that being created, it just takes time to figure out what consumers are doing when a new medium arrives, from going from 1 or 2 television channels to suddenly 12 changed consumption, going to satellite with 100 channel, 1,000 changes it again, right? Just how much we flip channels personally. So the internet is, I think we're the right now culture, even if we're not that generation. We know fundamentally, as being in the digital community, that a lot of change has occurred in how we use the web. Of course it has. The problem is it's still a new market in terms of figuring out, as he said earlier, internet could be a communication medium in which you're doing email, your profile, or chat, or it could be a consumption medium in which you're engaged, or it could be a two-way interactive medium. First thing I realized was that we were just getting to the point on the internet, enough years had passed after the invention, that it was no longer about the innovation of technology. That was a very important phase. So the equivalent would be, without the Betamax and the ATEX system for printing, you couldn't get the publishing revolution to occur. I believe that has happened. That was the first thing. The second thing was, if you regard the internet as a medium, and you look at all the other publishing houses, the large publishers have always had separate print, movie, television divisions. And the reason they do is they understand fundamentally these are completely different businesses, actually. From the creative to the editorial to the packaging to the way the brands use that medium is actually for the same message. A car advertiser could be doing an ad in a newspaper to drive you to buy a car while building emotion because you're launching something that will come next year, right? So the internet, I think what Glam, the premise of Glam when I first heard it and why it appealed to me was very simple. It was that ultimately the internet will become a medium, and when it does, brands will use it to engage and create emotion. And the answer to your question is very simple. If you look at total advertising, it's about 70% on an average is spent on the brand and emotional side. The direct response varies from brand to brand between 15 to 17% time of the total spend. a lot of the great big CPG brands actually don't even do any direct response, right? So at some point, this starts to tip. I believe if you look at just what we've seen in this last downturn, at least in the US, the only part that grew, search was down about 9% year over year, performance-based display was down between 15 to 30%, and premium is beginning to grow. And the reason is, I think intuitively people now know that the consumers or the spenders, let's get more specific, are actually doing a lot on the web. We all are. So that's the consumer part. The second part, which was important, was just like television evolved with cable to create the right packages where brands could trust that they can actually engage consumers, we found on the web that had not happened. And a good example of that is if you open a magazine and you see a beautiful Louis Vuitton ad, and the next ad is actually Hit the Monkey ad, and the next ad is from a completely unknown brand. As a brand manager, the first and the most important premise is brand proximity in the medium. And the internet is actually a terrible thing for that. So what we realized was this was the time to be innovative and create the actual idea where you can separate out these things. And I believe that has happened. So to answer your question on what will happen now, right now, internet is about 8.5% of spend in the US. About 50% of that is search. About 26% or 25% is what I would consider direct response display, and the rest is premium. These percentages are completely shifting. The internet will go, just like it has in the UK, from 8 to 10 to 15 to 20, I believe to about 25. It won't reach 30 or 33 that US has in television. That's my feeling. And brand advertising will be more than 50% of that. And that's it. The question is not if, it's when and how that will happen. So that's my answer.
Samir, thank you. That was specific. So basically you said, and we might quote you at DLD, it's 25% internet advertising. Half of that will be brands. That should be a multi-billion-dollar business at this point, and should be soon there because you said the infrastructure, everything is there. So I'd like the others to comment on that. Do you agree? You don't agree? What do you expect from the digital side, from all these digital entrepreneurs? What they have to do that you come to this medium, as Samir was just stating? Andrew, and then David, Trevor, Anne, and then I like you as the challenger of all that again.
I didn't say that.
No, I would like to add on Brazil.
I'd like to make 2 points. The first is I think we're probably almost ready to stop talking about digital. And I think maybe the most exciting thing we could do next year is not have a DLD, but just have an LD.
An LD?
Yeah, because I think that digital is now so woven into the fabric of so many different things that we used to call media, that to try and keep talking about it is as if it's something different. It's not the way people live, it's not the way people are. Times Square, which used to be called billboards, is a digital world. It's the most digital environment there is, and yet we don't talk about out of home as digital. We got to stop all of that. The second point is that connected to that, and I apologize for anybody who was in Frankfurt on Monday last week because they'd have heard the story, but as you know, Marcel, I get all of my insight and counsel from my daughter, who is now 18. And I was driving her back to school last year. She was, final year, she was running the school website. I was driving her back and I said, so what exciting things have you done to improve the website? Have you put a lot more information on it? And she said, no, there was already far too much information on it. So I said, well, what have you done to improve it? And she said, well, for example, you used to go on and it would put the timetable for today. It'd have all the classes, all the sports practices, all the choir practices or whatever. But now if you, Marcel, log on, what comes up is your schedule for today. Your classes, your basketball practice, your choir practice, whatever it is. And depending on where you log on from, an alarm goes off when you need to leave for the next class. So if you're having a free period and your next class is English, and you log on in your dorm room, an alarm goes off 4 minutes before your class because it takes 4 minutes to get there. But if you log on in the library, it goes off 2 minutes before because the library's 2 minutes closer to you. I said, wow, that's really clever. And then she said, and if you put in pizza, it'll tell you what pizza's in the restaurant in the school that day, and the sections of the pizza sections of the menus of all the restaurants in the area that deliver to the school come up with whatever they've got. And I said, this is really clever. How did you do all of this? And she said, and if you need one sentence to live by, it was this. She said, you just have to figure out what's useful, and the techies can do the rest. And she is absolutely right. We've now reached the point where anything is possible technically. That isn't the issue. The issue is finding what's useful.
Relevance and usefulness.
Yeah. Figure out what's useful, and the techies can do the rest.
I find that's key to be qualitative. But just being you're the chairman, BVDO, so Samir was saying 25% is online advertising, is 12 basically is on brand. So what do you think?
Well, I find the segmentation is really hard to do.
Okay.
Because what do we classify an extraordinary billboard in Times Square where you can text text it and your image appears on the billboard? Is that classified under that as digital advertising?
Roughly, would you say that?
I think nearly everything is going to have a digital component to it. So I think saying what percentage it is it's a large chunk of 100%, not 25% on its own. And I really do believe that's the way we've got to think about it. We also don't distinguish, when we're talking about it, between paid-for media, earned media, and owned media. And all three categories exist, and all three categories are real, and all three categories can be important to differing degrees to the consumers of particular brands. I think we should probably stop worrying about measuring it and just concentrate on figuring out what's useful.
Okay. Before I move on, Nizan, I would like to ask you from your market. So how do you see the digital advertising space evolving in Brazil? And is it different what you experience maybe in the United States, UK, or other markets?
No, I think that digital is crucial.
Yeah.
There's, for example, we are going to invest all we can only in digital agencies. Because since we are spreading throughout the world, it makes no sense to start, let's say, we can't have that, you can't say that anymore, but there's no sense in starting offline. The problem is the lousy pennies. Because if you are focused in results, probably you are not going to pay that attention yet to digital. You're going to say you are, you're going to pretend you are, but you will not. But I can tell you that the biggest source of new business and revenue for our company has become the digital area. Enormous growth. We launched an agency in California, and it was the agency of the year by Advertising Age. And it's just 1 year old. And it's a wonderful way of new business. But there's a problem in the digital world. The own digital world has a great difficulty in building brands. Marketing doesn't believe very much in digital, and digital doesn't believe very much in marketing. So that's a challenge. Because, for example, Google is not only an exceptional service, but it's a fantastic brand. And now, as the government of China, as the PR of Google, because what the government of China is doing to Google is making Google an even more important brand, because it's the challenging brand. You know, Google now is in the challenging brand of the government of China, and that is going to put over Google a great importance. You know, everybody is writing about it. You know, Google is appearing in another kind of site. So if you see everybody who has had an enormous success in internet, they were also very, very keen in building a brand. I just to end, I just like to quote Steve Jobs. Don't listen to the consumer. Please don't listen to the consumer, because if Henry Ford asked what the consumers wanted, they would say a faster horse.
Okay.
So understand what the consumer wants, and don't fight against common sense, but surprise the consumer. Otherwise, you are going to say the same thing the politicians say, because all of them read the same research. And the problem is that the consumer is like us. He lies. Okay? Anyone, let's do a research. Anybody here is unfaithful? Can you please raise your hand?
Unfaithful.
Unfaithful? Everybody's faithful. Anybody here is racist? Everybody. Anybody here is sexist? Come on, guys. Not one? So that's research, you know? You ask people... If you ask people in a focus group, the guy's going to answer in a certain way. If you ask people alone, he's not alone. He's him, his outer ego, and his ego. So, for example, a better way to have a disruption thing to do is to disrupt research, right? Because research can be a terrible tool in the hands of a bad client. Everything that goes with Mercedes and Trevor, you know, these guys are fantastic. And, you know, I don't believe they hear the consumer that much. I think that these are companies who have opinions about things. Of course, they don't go against common sense. But I love, Nike is a love brand. And if you stud Nike, you guys always had attitude. Mercedes the same. You know, of course, you're not going against common sense. So please, remember and read Steve Jobs. Don't hear the consumer.
See also Michael Conrad sitting here, great market advertiser, and you should have a discussion later on that. So actually we will ask David Drummond later of Google on China, so that's interesting. We have another 5-7 minutes. I'd like to we have 3 remaining. I'd like to ask you, maybe don't listen to the moderator again, Arne and Trevor and David. Samir was saying 25% is in internet digital advertising, half of that will be brand. That would be basically past lousy pennies, but at that point we are all very, very happy who are in the internet business, even more happy we are now. So please, is that right? Do you see that near term, or what? You don't see that? What do you think from your point of planning and strategy point of view?
To be honest, I do unfortunately not have the crystal ball, and it's almost impossible to give a clear answer to that. I think it's very daring, and it's a very solid forecast to make a statement like that. Damn it, you must be extremely rich due to the fact that you are so secure about what's going to be the future. I'm unfortunately not, that's the reason why I work within Daimler and not being an independent entrepreneur. I only want to know one thing, and that is we need to cover the complete scope. And I do say clear thing, one thing in certain areas, I agree with you, you should not listen too much to consumers because they are not capable of telling us what they really need. I agree. They talk about their experience, what they know, and that's absolutely useless if it's about to develop a product. On the other side, however, I do believe that one of the things which is extremely important for us is to see where do we see patterns. Because these patterns in how people use technology, how people use communication, by the way, is extremely important for us. And I do not believe that many companies do it, but we try to track. We do not do it this classical German way. I'm not a German myself. This facts and figure based, and what's not written in facts and figures we don't believe in, but we try to figure out something behind the screen, because I think that's much more important, and then to see how to drive our messages. And again, I do not also believe in what you said, Andrew. I do not talk so much about digital and this and that. I talk about a complete communication landscape. And I do believe that's most important. I do believe that all kind of communication channels have their purpose. I do believe that content is king. I do believe that quality is going to survive in all areas. However, quality is something which obviously has got lost in certain areas. And a lot of people are so afraid currently of challenges and their own business. So they forget developing their business and they forget giving their products a real profile. And to make it very clear, me as a marketeer, where do I put my money? I do put my money on a platform where I have a capability to reach out to the people I want to reach out to. And that is something which, unfortunately, a lot of people forget. And then they get embarrassed that I do not put my marketing money on their platform anymore. That's just as simple as that.
Okay.
So, Marcel,
do you help Samir with his quote, or is he alone, basically?
No. Our clients already spend 25% of the media in digital, and we have some spend over half. So that's interesting. Some of that's because of our mix of agencies and a little bit of a U.S. focus. I do think the reason we merged television and press together with it to create Viviki was the whole thing is really confused. On Saturday night, MTV ran a telethon for Haiti. Millions of people watched it in high definition on PCs. If you went to CES, half the televisions were computers. If you listen to Michael Mendenhall today, there's 3.6 billion books burned without anyone reading them, magazines. We should get done with that. The Kindle changed books. I think the majority of media will be digital. I think the challenge is you're competing with television now. You got to up your game. And I think at the end of the day, we've got the power to do all these great things we do in the PC screen in all screens now. It will be if we're good, it will be more brand driven. If we have innovative products, you will be brand driven. We'll be promotional if we run out of ideas and we have to push commodity products. So I really pray it's majority digital and majority brand.
Trevor.
I would kind of definitely support what Andrew said before. I think it's a fallacious question. I think it's a question that you don't ask. You shouldn't ask the question that way, because it isn't really about whether it's digital or not. Everything is digital. It's permeating our life. And it feels like the question is the wrong question, which is to focus on the consumer's life, and then we solve from that perspective, which I think is what he said. The second thing I do want to kind of call to attention to, which is that I do love the idea of not listening to the consumer to an extent, but I think we listen with our ears, we see with our eyes, right? We observe small things. Those are also paying attention to the consumer, and then we reimagine what's possible for them. And I think that there are some great brands doing some great things. So many people here have probably used Genius from Apple, which is actually, as much as what Steve says, Genius listens to what you do, sees what you do, and then provides you a great solution. So I think that there are some really powerful ways, and the digital world is giving us some better ways to serve the consumer. I think that's the part where I see tremendous opportunity for us in the future. So that's where I come from, which is, pay attention to the consumer, serve them in some amazing ways, and reimagine what their expectations ask.
Marcel, I have just one comment, which is I think what he said is absolutely right. And the reason both the question is important is, from a brand perspective and a message perspective, you have to look at the 360 of how you could reach a consumer. The reason this question is important for this audience here is actually in the delivery platform, as you had said, there's a lot of change occurring. So when we're talking about the numbers from a digital perspective, it's not to say it's, as he was saying, digital versus television, or is IPTV digital or not, or when you're communicating and, just like we saw in the movie, the ad changes when you walk by it, all this is going to happen. I think the reason the question is important is that if you look at the media business today, 50% of that is Google from a publisher perspective. So a large part of this audience completely relies on that number actually from a platform perspective, not from a message perspective. So I think if we separate the question out to say, from a messaging perspective, I don't know any CMO who does not listen to consumer, build from the heart, and have a message that then is tailored by platform. The economics of the spend on digital as a platform is a very, very important question, because that is completely changing the power between publishing companies that you have to rely on at some level. Even if you're using Facebook to reach to consumers, that's your platform. And the economics of Facebook versus Twitter are extremely critical right now to determine. So I think from that perspective, there really are two different questions in this one. So I just wanted to add that, just listening to what the panel had to say to that question.
Thank you. We have another 3 minutes. I would like to listen to the audience at some point and have at least 2 questions from the audience. I think Michael Trautmann, he created an own agency, and I would come back to the big and small. There's a mic over there. 1 comment, 1 question, challenging. And who would have the second question? Who wants to have a second question? Then you have, after you identify, and then we close the panel.
I'm so unprepared. I don't have a question, I just have a comment. So I've learned my lesson at my time at Audi, where I had to work with several agencies all around the world. And we worked with BBDO in Brazil, with Ogilvy in South Africa, with BBH in London. And the idea behind this was to work with the best agency in the country. Sometimes it was a small hot shop, sometimes it was a network. And I think it's not the question whether it's a big or a small, a network or an independent agency. It's just a question whether it's a good or a bad agency. I think it's that simple.
Wollen Sie, Dr. Da zum Mic?
Agreed.
Is it okay, Andrew?
Agreed.
Second question,
and
we have a third one.
Yeah, I'm actually quite keen on...
Who are you?
I'm Matthias from Weave magazine, and I'm quite keen on getting some more insight into how big corporations such as Mercedes or Nike actually have to face tremendous, I would say, internal changes on reacting. Like nowadays you say you have product is marketing, but of course this kind of needs certain structures within your corporations, like how does R&D talk to marketing, you know, and all like this. I was just curious how you deal internally with these issues in a large global corporation.
Okay, and now Dr. Borda. Dr. Borda. Excuse me, Trevor, would you like, just to shortly reply to his question, actually?
I'll reply as shortly as I can. I think what we have certainly tried to do is actually restructure our organizations so we can bring the functions together, from product to marketing to the commercial to the R&D, bring those units together to serve a specific consumer audience. And with that, we start that at the creation. So rather than waiting at the end to sort of say, okay, what can we solve at the end, we think about it all the way from the beginning of the creation of that product and how we actually bring it to marketplace. That's a structural change for our organization to bring those ideas to the marketplace.
And I think, Arora?
Yeah, I do believe that one of the most important things is that you need to dare to dare. That means you need to take some chances, and you also need to really be willing to risk something, and also to willing to accept failures. There's a lot of things out there where we have no clue whether you really reach your target, and you need to do that. If you have a strong brand, you manage, because that is something which you will always survive. And in certain areas, just test it and just do it. Just do it. So for that reason, I do believe also from our side, you need to cooperate, you need to work with a lot of people with different kind of competencies, and of course, you need to have a lot of self-confidence, especially to convince your quite classical board, who are used to deal with nuts and bolts, that this is the way to approach, and that's the challenging, but also the fun part of it, so we have a lot of fun.
One last question. Who in the audience is making more than 50% of the revenues with Gutenberg Media? Where are the Springer boys? You're making 80%.
Peter, you stand up. Peter, identify.
One of the most profitable media company in Germany was Bild-Zeitung. Incredible. What I wanted to describe is that in the so-called old media, Gutenberg media, everything is digital. Everything is digital. The editors on the PC, the transfer from the PC to the cylinders. There's only one analog moment. It is the moment where the cylinder full of color is hitting the paper. There's no much difference to Hewlett-Packard. So what I want to point is that there is so much aesthetically to consider about the interface. The interface of paper is something totally other as the interface of a PC screen. And the FAZ Friday came up with a good description in which the double page or the book is more or less fixing the world for you. And you must concentrate. You are not going out in this moment. So the world is in a kind of, wie sagt man, conclusion, abgeschlossen. Well, how do you translate abgeschlossen? Huh? Whatever. The web. The web is always going on and on. You are on the web. You are always outside. You are connected. But this possibility gives incredible impact. But in your brain, I tell you, for brands, there is a center for stills. There's a center for stills, a center for silence. And you will see in the next years, I was discussing about the influence of art with Obrist, who comes later. I told him I cannot see anything what arts can do in this new world. He said, yeah, silence, quietness. So my believing is that the future of Brand and Gutenberg is that there's someone in our brain who is strongly reacting on still pictures, on pictures has not the same impact, and the interface will be paper for the next 20 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. I'd like to... There's nothing to add to this, just one word from Don Draper on advertising. Do we have tone? Sound?
You call love was invented. What you call love was invented by guys like me to sell nylons.
So do you get it? Love was invented to sell nylons. So that is Mad Men. Thank you for a great panel.